The Middle East is once again the boiling cauldron of the world, and once again America. As I mentioned to you before, Israel had firmly placed the idea of getting rid of its biggest rival, Iran, over the past few years into its mind. In this process, its biggest supporter was undoubtedly the United States under the Trump administration. However, although Trump initially appeared willing to rein in Iran, over time he opened the door to dialogue and stepped back from Israel's harsh targets. Exactly at this breaking point, according to some theories, Israel's deep structures stepped in. According to allegations through the Jewish lobby in America, action scandals were brought back onto the agenda, and Trump was left in the middle of public pressure. Theorists and some journalists claimed that Mossad gave Trump a covert message. Either he does what Israel wants and eliminates Iran, or all the details about his fantasies would be served to the world, primarily to the United States. Thus, not even a month after the Epstein scandals, the United States decided to attack Iran and officially started the war. So, my friends, what had been going on in the background? Come, let us open our archives so that you can understand the events from the very beginning. In the 6th century BCE, the Jews were living under the Jewish kingdom in the land of Canaan. The Babylonian Empire, established in today's Iraq, rose faster than Bitcoin and eventually conquered the land of Canaan. This conquest brought the end of the kingdom of Judah, and days of disaster began for the Jews. The Babylonian king plundered Jerusalem and also destroyed the Temple of Solomon, which the Jews considered sacred. Not content with this, the king did not allow the Jews to remain in their sacred lands and sent all of them into exile under the name of the Babylonian exile. According to the Torah, 70 years after this event, the Persians under the leadership of Cyrus the Great eliminated Babylonian rule and allowed the Jews to return to the land of Canaan, and had the Temple of Solomon that the Babylonians had destroyed rebuilt. For this reason, Cyrus the Great, who was legendary among the Persians, became a ruler remembered with respect among the Jews for centuries. Over time, the Persians lost their power over the lands of Iran. With the spread of Islam, first the Arabs, and then the Turks for nearly 1,000 years dominated the region. The situation lasted so long that even the name Persian had disappeared. Since there is no letter P in Arabic, just as they call Plato Eflatun, they began to call the Persians Fars. In Iran, which had remained under Turkish rule for a very long time, a military uprising broke out in 1925, and Reza Pahlavi became the new ruler of Iran. Reza Pahlavi cared greatly about ancient Iran. For this reason, he wanted to re-establish Persian culture as dominant in Iran. Although he abdicated before completing his work, his son shared the same view and continued his efforts in the same direction. Applying this political mission in foreign policy as well, the Shah, just like the ancient Persian Emperor Cyrus the Great, wanted to establish good relations with the Jews. For this reason, when the Jews founded a state, Iran became one of the 2 Muslim countries that recognized Israel. At the end of the 1970s, the oppressive Shah regime in Iran had completely gone too far and had gathered great reaction on the social ground because of its close relations with the United States. Large segments of the public took to the streets due to economic injustice, repression, and political exclusion. This mass opposition quickly turned into a revolution, and in 1979 the Shah's rule was overthrown. In its place, under the leadership of Ruhollah Khamenei, the Islamic Republic of Iran was declared. This new regime established a theocratic system based on the principle of Islamic law. After the revolution, in order to survive, Iran tried to export the revolution to the surrounding countries, and within this framework provided financial and ideological support to regional terrorist organizations, primarily Shiite militias. Turkey also received its share from Iran's revolution export policy, and it was influential in the emergence of formations such as Kurdish Hezbollah. The first serious resistance to Iran's policy was shown by Saddam Hussein. In 1980, the Iran-Iraq War broke out. Despite foreign policy pressures, this war led Iran to unite even more internally and became an important factor in the regime's ability to sustain its revolutionary ideology. The policies Iran has pursued for more than 40 years made it one of the notable powers of the Middle East. However, in the 2020s, this influence gradually weakened. Especially Hezbollah, one of the most important militia forces in the region, was largely neutralized by Israel together with its leadership cadre. Then, in Syria, the Bashar al-Assad regime collapsed, and the regional balances shifted momentum. As a result of these developments, Iran, which became the latest target of the United States and Israel, faced an intense wave of attacks in June 2025. All these developments shattered Iran's prestige in foreign policy. In fact, although the Mullah regime in Iran initially perceived the developments with delay months ago, they had foreseen that these days would come sooner or later. That is exactly why, in order to prevent a new uprising from breaking out inside, they carried a moderate figure who could gain the support of the public to the presidency office. Masoud Pezeshkian. Pezeshkian stands out both with his Turkish origin and his reformist identity. The Mullah regime created, in his person, a perception of safe reform under its own control that would not cross its red lines. Thus, both a message of opening to the West was given, and a hope of controlled change was created inside. Moreover, the president being of Turkish origin gave a sense of representation to the millions in South Azerbaijan, one of the country's largest minorities, and significantly reduced ethnic tension. The steam of separatist movements was taken out, and the ground of social peace was strengthened. Now, with the rising public support behind him, he is paving the way for the country to act as one body in a possible foreign intervention. In short, the regime is trying both to keep the inside calm and to strengthen its hand against the outside. In other words, a stick with shit on both ends. However, the problems did not remain limited to this. As of 2024, high inflation, the serious depreciation of the currency, and the energy crisis causing electricity and natural gas cuts cornered Iran internally as well. Seeing that failures in foreign policy were directly reflected inside, the Iranian people began to criticize the government harshly. Struggling in an economic crisis, the public is seriously disturbed by the country's resources being spent by the religious authority on revolutionary fantasies. This discomfort reached such a point that the president of Iran, Masoud Pezeshkian, had to apologize to the public for the economic crisis. However, the real target of society was not the president, but the religious authority that actually governs the state. In Iran, the real power is in the hands of Ali Khamenei and the narrow cadre around him. In other words, the president is merely a symbol. While the public was struggling with the economic crisis, the political corruption allegations regarding the Mullah regime coming out into the open, and new tax increases coming onto the agenda, further increased the anger. Society continued its reaction by stating that the regime gives priority to foreign policy instead of internal problems. These reactions quickly spilled into the streets, and slogans such as "Neither Gaza nor Lebanon, my life for Iran" began to be chanted. Thus, on 28th of December 2025, the Iranian people, overwhelmed by the pressure of the authoritarian regime, took to the streets across the country. While the demonstrators openly expressed that the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran should be overthrown, they also displayed actual resistance against the security forces. Iran's spiritual leader, Ali Khamenei, reacted harshly to the protests, accusing the demonstrators of vandalism and being agents of foreign powers. Khamenei called on the public to do not disturb the order and asked everyone to behave. By the way, it is useful to briefly mention Ali Khamenei. After the death of Ruhollah Khomeini in 1989, Khamenei, who came to power in Iran at the age of 50, is today one of the longest-serving leaders of the Middle East, with his rule exceeding 36 years. However, time is not working in Khamenei's favor. He has aged and has largely surrounded himself with a cadre consisting of his own generation. This boomer team, which has difficulty reading the dynamics of today's world, remains insufficient in showing fast and effective reflexes in crisis management. For this reason, Ali Khamenei is directly shown as the ultimate responsible figure for almost every political and economic crisis experienced in Iran. As a matter of fact, the slogans chanted on the second day of the protests, "Death to the dictator, death to Khamenei," are the best example of this. Of course, instead of putting the economic crisis, which is at the center of the protests, on his agenda, Ali Khamenei is almost adding fuel to the fire by making statements implying that this uprising was caused by the United States and Israel. But my friends, until today we have always seen Iran as America's archenemy. But have you ever thought about what kind of interest Iran's existence and its actions have provided to America? No, I will not say conspiracy theory or anything. Everything is based on reality. Today, America's military and political moves in the Middle East against Iran have often been considered legitimate by the Sunni countries in the region. Moreover, almost every 3 to 5 years, the White House has managed to sell its old weapons waiting in its warehouses to the Gulf countries for billions of dollars, under the pretext of the Iran threat. So much so that Saudi Arabia, where the fear of Shiite Iran has almost surpassed the fear of God, signed a massive $110 billion arms deal with America during Trump's first presidential term, that is, in 2017. During Trump's second presidential term, that is in 2025, one of the largest defense sales in U.S. history was signed, and this time a new agreement worth $142 billion was made with Saudi Arabia. In the last 15 years, the total arms and defense trade between America and Saudi Arabia varies between $200 and $400 billion. The total purchase amount of the other Gulf countries is close to approximately $100 billion. So America is practically milking these Gulf countries, which see Iran as a potential threat and sectarian rival, like cows. It both sells them weapons and strengthens its hand in the region by saying, "I will protect you from Iran," and runs wild as it wishes. Of course, we are facing the United States of America, so there is no need to be too surprised. However, Iran has almost turned into a place of fire. The son of the Shah, who was overthrown 47 years ago, Reza Pahlavi, also stated that the people should continue the protests and promised that he would return to Iran soon. With Reza Pahlavi becoming involved in the process, a large part of the demonstrators tore the Iranian flag and waved the pre-regime flags in the squares. Of course, since Reza Pahlavi's closeness to Israel is known by the whole world, the mullah regime in Iran is trying to use this situation as propaganda material. Moreover, with Trump making statements supporting the protesters, the uprising became even more animated. In response to Trump's statements, Khamenei described the U.S. president as arrogant and stated that Trump would be overthrown like other arrogant leaders. In return, U.S. President Donald Trump used the expressions, "Iran is perhaps looking at freedom like never before. U.S. assistance is ready." Although the Iranian regime, being even more disturbed by these comments coming from outside, imposed an internet ban, the protesters who managed to break this ban continue their propaganda activities. Well, as things stand, the Iranian regime increased the level of violence and began massacres against the protesters. According to some, the number of deaths reached the thousands, but the Iranian government is hiding these figures. It is even claimed that Iran is trying to suppress the protests by bringing many Iraqi militia groups it supports into the country. Kurdish parties in Iran also published a public statement stating that they support the citizen strikes and demonstrations. The Baloch, on the other hand, carried out direct armed attacks against government forces without bothering to make a statement. Since we have entered ethnic origins, let us take a look at them as well. First, let us look at the Turks, who are the second most crowded ethnic group after the Persians. Within the strong Turkish population in the country, there are serious differences of opinion regarding separation. One group advocates first the establishment of an independent South Azerbaijan, then the unification of Azerbaijan, and ultimately the dream of Turan. Another group thinks that Iran should once again be ruled by Turks, just like in its history. In other words, that Iran should become a Turkish state again. Apart from these differences of opinion, they cannot easily organize because of the pressure of the regime. In addition, they generally act peacefully in their separatist movements. The Kurds, compared to other ethnic groups, have a much more complex and fragmented structure, both politically and in terms of tribal organization. They are almost divided into three like a cake. Some of the separatist Kurds are close to the line of Mesut Barzani. Especially some Kurdish tribes in and around Sanandaj have stayed close to Barzani throughout the 20th century. In the regions near the Iranian border around Sulaymaniyah, there are minority Kurdish groups that sympathize with Talabani. However, the main majority adopts the line of PJAK, the Iranian branch of the PKK, that is the Apoist line. In the last 15 to 20 years, the movement that has been most organized and gained the most tendency among young Kurds in Iran has again been PJAK, the Iranian branch of the PKK. In the Avaz region live Arabs. A significant part of the Arabs here advocate separating from Iran and establishing an independent state. There are even groups that have radicalized enough to establish armed organizations for this purpose and fight the Iranian regime. In the Iraq-Iran war that broke out in 1980, Saddam Hussein first entered these areas in order to gain the support of these Arabs. But neither the Arabs nor the Kurds, none of them are as radical, reckless, and independent as the Baloch, living in the southeast of Iran. The Baloch are in a constant state of war with the Iranian regime because of their Sunni identity. Groups here establish armed organizations such as Jaish al-Adl and clash with the regime's soldiers at every opportunity. The organizations have adopted an al-Qaeda-style Salafi jihadist ideology and have turned into the most fanatic, most dangerous structures in Iran. In short, when it comes to the greatest challenge to the state and radicalism in Iran, the Baloch are unrivaled. These four ethnic groups are not at peace with the Iranian regime, and they want to separate. Exactly at this point, a vital issue emerges for Turkey. Some nationalists argue that Turkey should support South Azerbaijan and ensure the establishment of an independent Turkish state in the region, or at least autonomy. However, according to some circles, such a move would become an excuse that would legitimize their own separatist demands for the Kurds in the region by saying, "Look, the Turks did it, we can do it too." Thus, in the end, a strong Kurdish structure would emerge in Iran. Relations with Iran would become strained, and the possibility of a Kurdish corridor on the Syria-Iraq line would strengthen. In addition, Turkey would enlarge its own Kurdish issue. But according to the nationalist wing, the Kurds have already organized and are counting the days for a separate state. In this case, it would be against their own interests for the Turkish population in South Azerbaijan and for Turkey and Azerbaijan to remain unresponsive. The classic example given here is Iraq. When Turkey refrained from intervening for fear of Iraq becoming unstable, groups other than the Turks quickly gained power there. As a result, Turkey was excluded from the table. Another fact is this: the South Azerbaijan becoming an independent state means Turkey opening a land corridor with the other Turkic states. For this reason, many people see this as a historic opportunity. If we take into consideration the significant Turkish population in South Azerbaijan, in a possible turmoil in Iran, autonomy or the establishment of a new state will not be very difficult. The only condition is that Turkey and Azerbaijan have active support in this matter. But this is a situation that countries like Russia and America would not look upon warmly, because the division of Iran would deeply shake the balance of power in the region. Until today, America has seen Turks, Arabs, and Persians in the Middle East as the main elements balancing each other. However, the establishment of South Azerbaijan as an independent state would overturn these balances and make the Turks the new effective power of the region. This scenario is a situation that America, Russia, Armenia, Israel, and Arab countries would never want. Especially Armenia would be completely surrounded in such a case. Because Armenia has continuously supplied the weapons and logistics it needed in its war against Azerbaijan through Iran until today. Iran has also backed Armenia for years in order to maintain the balance against Azerbaijan and has supported it at every opportunity. Pay attention, when the issue is South Azerbaijan, even all the actors who are normally enemies of each other meet on the same side. In other words, this matter is a bit difficult. But when it comes to the Kurds establishing a state, no one is disturbed. On the contrary, this development adds a new player to the balancing elements. In other words, Boss America, despite being thousands of kilometers away, is still determining the fate of the region today. However, since the era of Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, Turkey has adopted the territorial integrity of its neighbors as a fundamental foreign policy principle. Especially regarding Iran, as well as Syria, Iraq, and other border neighbors, it has persistently defended the principle of the immutability of borders, because for Turkey, Any division that may occur in neighboring countries brings with it the risk of triggering ethnic and sectarian fault lines within itself, although this approach is sometimes stretched according to developments in the field. That is, sometimes different steps are taken in practice. Ankara's official line does not change. The division of neighbors means instability and terrorist threat in the region. As a matter of fact, the chaos experienced in Syria and Iraq led to the emergence of radical paramilitary groups in the region, and these groups began to show direct hostility towards Turkey. Do not make me give examples and have the video removed from YouTube, my friends. In addition, the division of Iran does not only mean a security weakness at the border or an influx of millions of new refugees, it would also strike Turkey heavily economically. Iran is a major trade partner for Turkey. At the same time, it is an important supplier of natural gas and oil. In a possible chaos, trade would stop, energy prices would soar, imports would become difficult. This would lead to an increase in inflation in Turkey, an energy crisis, and the growth of economic troubles. In short, a crisis that will break out in Iran means a great risk that can extend to Turkey's internal balances. Therefore, my dear friends, it would not be wrong to say that the plans of America and Israel regarding Iran directly affect Turkey as well. While the protests in Iran were continuing, America had gone the way of negotiation with Iran. This had not pleased Israel. However, as we said at the beginning of the video, shortly after the Epstein files, that is, on 28 February 2026, the United States of America and Israel attacked Iran and started a new crisis. While you are watching this video, the parties are probably continuing to fight each other. What will happen? Time will show us.